Thank you. So I'm going to keep it short since Bill did use a lot of time. I too like the visual of the mirror in Mexico. So when I was in treatment, we called that the serenity pouch. Once you've been sober for a little bit and you start to get the... So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about some support groups that are out there and what they look like. As Andrea mentioned in her story, which was so well put, was that it's terrifying, right? For people in recovery, it's scary going to your first meeting and not knowing what you're walking into. So anything we can do to help ease that fear is very important. So Bill did mention that there's open meetings, and we encourage people to go to those as well to see what it looks like. So at Umbrella, I work for the Umbrella Society, and part of what we do is we meet with clients, and a big part of what we do is system navigation. So we point people in the direction of different support groups that are out there, and we do what we're doing now, which is explaining what they're all about. We'll try and go with people to their first meeting because we know that can be a huge help, as it's totally terrifying to walk in there. So I'm going to talk a little bit. There's a list that's in the handouts here that lists some of the support groups that are out there. So I'll start with AA and NA, which are the most widely known 12-step groups. So Andrea talked about the spiritual aspect of that and how the higher power can be really open to your interpretation. So I have sort of a spiel that I give people before they go to a 12-step meeting, which is the first and most important thing I say to people is you don't have to say a word, right? So people are often, when they come into recovery, they're so scared and full of anxiety, and they use alcohol or drugs to be able to get through these social situations, that the thought of getting up in front of a group of people and telling their story is just terrifying for them in the beginning. So I reassure people that you don't have to say a word. You can just sit in the back and listen. And in the beginning, that's where a lot of the magic happens, just hearing other people share their stories and being able to relate to them. So there's tons and tons of AA meetings in the community. From morning to night, 6:30 a.m. is the earliest one, and 10 p.m. is the latest. So you can, people can technically fill their schedule with going to AA or NA full time, which a lot of people do in the beginning to get through those initial rough stages. So the 12-step stuff's been covered pretty good, and there's people at the back that can talk a bit more about that. One thing that I've learned in my own recovery and from the work I do is that, and we really try and enforce that, recovery is not a one-size-fits-all model. So, it doesn't have to be the 12-step program. If that doesn't work for you, let's check out some other options. And that doesn't have to be the first option either. Let's just check out the landscape, see what's out there, try different things, and see what's going to be a fit for you. And it also doesn't have to be one or the other. So LifeRing, which is the next one I'll talk about, is another option that's out there. Again, you don't have to commit to go into either 12-step meetings or LifeRing. You can do both, or you can rotate back and forth, and whatever makes you comfortable. So the LifeRing meetings are a little different in the fact that they don't have the structure of AA meetings as far as the 12-step format goes. So what happens in a LifeRing meeting is you come in and there's a facilitator that runs the meeting, and there's different meetings around town. A different facilitator runs each weekly meeting. And the format for a LifeRing meeting is, how was your week? So you'll sit down and you'll do a quick group check-in. The other thing I tell people is that LifeRing meetings are small. They're kept to 15 people or under, and if they're over that, they'll break off into 2 groups. So they'll do a quick check-in, how was your week? And then what they'll do is the facilitator will sort of guide some general conversation. So again, it's peer support based, and you can open up your situation to feedback. So if you're going through some challenges, you can say that, yeah, I'm open to hearing what people have to say about this. And then people can offer feedback in a way they really use I statements. So it's not going to be someone saying, you're screwing up, this is what you have to do, blah, blah, blah. I've been through something similar. This is something that helped me on my journey, and you can get peer support from that way. What else can I say about LifeRing? So the website addresses are on the list here as well that we've given out. And there's online meetings as well for LifeRing, as well as a workbook you can get and work from home. So Smart Recovery is another option that's newer to Victoria. So Smart Recovery is it's pretty big across the States and across the rest of Canada. We're a little late to the party, but it's been quite successful since coming here. We've got a table back here, and we have 2 meetings in town right now, and hopefully it grows. So Smart Recovery, again, uses a different approach that is based on what they call their SMART tools. And these are cognitive behavioral therapy-based techniques that they use. So again, it's peer support in the fact that you do a group check-in, talk about what's going on for you, and then people can volunteer to have the facilitator do almost like a lesson on how those tools can be applied to your situation as well. So I recommend Smart Recovery a lot for people that are academically inclined or into pie charts and graphs and that kind of stuff. That they really seem to jive with that meeting, and it clicks with them. AlAnon. So, like Bill mentioned, there's not a ton of support out there for family members. So AlAnon is a good one. And again, they work on the 12-step model. So AlAnon, I think there's a bit of a myth for some people coming into AlAnon that they're going to go into the meeting and the people at the meeting are going to teach them how to stop the person they care about from drinking or using, which I get a sick sense of pleasure in a way of seeing people be surprised when they go to those meetings and find out that, hey, we're going to talk about me and work on my issues, right? Because I'm on the other side of the fence. But that is the point of it, that you go and gain tools to learn how to deal with your own issues when someone you care about is going through addiction. And what we often see is people that come through recovery themselves, say they go to AA or Smart Recovery or LifeRing, they'll often end up going to AlAnon as well to explore, say, their childhood issues or people they care about that are living with addiction as well. Addiction outpatient treatment is AOT, since we love acronyms so much with Island Health. They are located on Quadra Street, and they offer a ton of different support groups as far as educational based. They have drop-in groups that are gender specific. They do trauma specific groups. So at AOT, a lot of their educational based groups, you have to sign up and commit to going. So it's more like a course, which some people in the early goings, they like that accountability and knowing they have to stay sober for that period of time and that they're expected to be there the following week. And RAS is another one that is educational-based approach to things. So I often recommend RAS to people in early recovery because there's a lot of young people there, and it's got a very sort of social aspect to it. And people often end up branching out and doing things outside of the rooms as well together. So there's sober sports, sober movies, campfires. I've heard of all sorts of different activities that happen there. As well as the bonus to go into that group is you get a couple bus tickets and a pool pass, so people can make that part of the routine. So they'll go to a RAS meeting and then they'll hit the gym after, or go to a noon meeting and sort of structure their whole recovery game plan from there. What else do I want to say? Connections is another brand new group that's run with Umbrella and Island Health, so it's a collaboration. And Connections is a good starting point for people. So It's for anyone on any sort of wait list or who just want to get connected to recovery in any sort of way and don't exactly know where to start. Drop-in group every Tuesday and Friday, and we can actually, that group is small as well, so we can actually sit and do referrals with people. We can refer them to detox and get them started or point them in the right direction of other support groups. Yeah, so there's a ton, I guess basically there's a ton of variety out there as far as different groups. It's just it's a matter of knowing where to start, what direction to go, and finding out what's going to be a fit for you. So we encourage people to check out everything that's out there, and don't give up on something if it's not a fit for you right away. It's not the end of the lines. There's plenty of options. Thanks.
All right, thank you. In full disclosure, I also wore my fancy shoes tonight. Actually wore them. They are the nicest shoes I own. And when I bought them, actually a large reason why I bought them was because the young woman who sold them to me, when I put them on to try them on, said that they were sick. Those shoes are sick. And I was like, okay, I gotta get these shoes. All right, there's nothing like being a scientist invited to a party like this. And so I'll start off by saying that I'm very honored to be here, and I want to acknowledge all of the expertise and the bravery in the room from the folks who got up tonight to share their stories. And what I'm going to say, I think, is going to start off sounding like I'm putting a wrench into the works. But I'm not. And so bear with me, because I've probably got about 5 minutes to run over the 3 decades of research plus that's gone in to the different types of 12-step and other kinds of recovery groups, what it does and doesn't say, where the research gaps are, and then leave you with some thoughts about how you can work through the complexity of this research. And there's one thing that I think I'm often reminded of when I'm teaching at the university or when I'm doing these engagements. A lot of working through some of the complexity of this research is really becoming comfortable with uncertainty and knowing when it's very unlikely that there will ever be a study that's designed that will show that something definitively works. And that is true for substance use and substance use disorders. I do a lot of systems research, so how different services coordinate and work together, even across sectors, because I do a lot of work with women who are pregnant and going into treatment. So we do a lot of research on that interface between the women and child welfare systems, for instance. And again, there's no right or wrong answers here. This is just the way that the system works. One of the factors that I've really become alarmed at, increasingly over time, although I understand it, is the divergence between harm reduction and recovery. Because the folks that I work with in harm reduction absolutely identify with being in recovery. Might not be abstinent, but they're in recovery. And that's valid too. I would just invite people to think about how the division between the abstinence-based recovery movement and the harm reduction movement is really tailored to actually hurt the people who have substance use disorders. It's not to their advantage that we see those as mutually exclusive options. So probably the best, most well-known study of the effectiveness of 12-step groups, and I will say that 12-step groups, because they've been around for longer, they've got a larger base. The vast majority of research on recovery groups is on 12-step groups. I'll talk a little bit about that. Probably the most well-known study is the Cochrane review that was published in 2006. Now, this was really interesting because what they said after they reviewed the literature, and they have a very rigorous and a very above-board, very scientific way of reviewing the literature that's out there and really trying to piece together what it's actually saying. And in all of their reviews, they include a section on implications for practice, which is helpful for clinicians. They concluded that there was actually no conclusive evidence to show that AA can help patients to achieve abstinence. It was focused on alcohol use disorders, nor was there any conclusive evidence to show that it cannot. So how do we as scientists interpret this? Well, in reading the literature, you will find studies that cite this Cochrane review as proving that AA works, and you will find studies citing the Cochrane review saying it is conclusively does not work. And I see them both. It didn't say either of those things. It said there was no conclusive evidence. That's what that means. In their implications for practice section, which I thought was very good, they said that clinicians and policymakers, healthcare professionals, need to be aware of what that means and to try to work with that as they're going through their practice and when they give advice. And they finished their review by saying the active collaboration of patients or clients should perhaps be sought to identify the best intervention that works for the specific person. So here we're coming back to this key idea that this is about the therapeutic alliance, this is about individualized treatment planning and assessment, and that's where the evidence across interventions really converges to suggest that that's what needs to happen when someone comes to you to ask for help. Now, since the Cochrane review, there have been a number of other meta-analyses done, and probably the best of those was done by Keith Humphreys in the States, where he reanalyzed a bunch of data from randomized controlled trials of AA and found that attendance was associated with abstinence. So where does that fit in? And does that actually disagree with what the Cochrane review said? I think we can pretty much say that the evidence says that 12-step facilitation, 12-step groups, and to some degree other recovery groups as well, probably work for some people. In fact, they do work for some people. That's not in question. That is just obvious based on what we see from the science and listening to people's stories. I would counter that does AA work, do recovery groups work, is actually the wrong question to ask, and it's why we're hamstrung here. It's why we can't get past that. It's not about whether or not it works. It's about how it works and how it doesn't work, and who it works for and why. Are there any unintended consequences? Who is most likely to experience them? Under what circumstances is that most likely to happen? And that's where the gaps in evidence are. And that's a much more thoughtful approach for scientists to engage with the data and try to figure out what's going on. And also by work. If you even just think of the word work. The typical measure in these studies is abstinence. So what we're saying is that we're showing that people who stick with an abstinence-based group are more likely to be abstinent. That's a tautological argument. It's not evidence that the group works. It also presupposes that abstinence is a necessary part of recovery, which the research also does not support. Now, part of what's really interesting about the research is on the how question. And here I can give a shout out to my old colleagues in Boston. I worked, after I finished my doctorate, I worked at Harvard with John Kelly, who's the head of the Recovery Research Institute down there. And I think he also did the study you mentioned earlier, Bill, with the language. What's really interesting about the work that John Kelly does is that he doesn't just look at, does it work? Does this work? Does that work? We are pitting interventions against one another to see which one works better than the other. Okay, that's not the right question. Let's look at how they work. So he tries to map out in a scientific way what are the mechanisms through which attending a recovery group might help someone. And that's very helpful. That's very useful information to have. And what his line of research has tended to show is that, at least for Alcoholics Anonymous, the benefits seem to be carried by social, cognitive, affective mechanisms. So they're reducing people's negative affect, they're improving self-efficacy, they're helping people make adaptive changes to their social networks. And that's really how a lot of interventions work in this field. So it shouldn't really be surprising, yet there is definitely, or has been traditionally, a real separation of recovery group research from treatment research. Now, these are not studies that look at, they're not studies with control groups that look at different types of interventions in people recovering. What they do is they take a group of people and they follow people over time, and they're looking at how people change over time. And they're trying to connect concepts of affect and self-efficacy with their meeting attendance to see how that differs. So it's not about whether it works. It's not about superiority of interventions. It's about how it works. Where we have a gap in evidence is the for whom issue, the systematic evaluation of the way that circumstances and trauma do and do not make it difficult for people to engage and not. And that's not unique to recovery groups, I'll just say. That's actually probably a fair criticism of all of the research that we're involved in. There's really limited evidence at this point, unfortunately, for other groups. And there's been some helpful reviews of the literature published just in the past couple of years on SMART, not on LifeRing. I don't think I've ever seen too much on LifeRing. And that's not to say that it doesn't work. That's to say it's a gap in the evidence, which is fine. The take-home message is that, yes, some people are going to benefit from this. And the reality of our current system is that there are no forms, there's very little aftercare available to people. So what are people supposed to do after they go to a residential care center, after they get out of outpatient counseling, or while they're in outpatient counseling? If there are a few resources available, this is an option. There's no support for requiring them as a necessary part of recovery, and that's important because we're increasingly seeing them mandated. They're a potentially good resource. There's no reason to further stigmatize the folks who either cannot or are not interested in abstinence. The fact that we're seeing more research that consistently points to these non-specific treatment factors, that it's not about the specific intervention, it's about the therapeutic alliance, it's about self-efficacy. These are non-specific treatment factors because they kind of cross the board. The fact that that is consistent in the evidence, the fact that this is emerging as the way that people, the way that AA could potentially exert its effects, that suggests that probably the appropriate thing to do is to foster a therapeutic relationship with your parents. Whoa, that would have made Freud, like Freud just rolled over in his grave or something there. That was, oh my God, that's on video too. Whew. Don't lose the opportunity to engage with patients. Finding a recovery group or other opportunities for meaningful purpose activity is probably going to be a helpful aspect in whatever form that looks like, and it can include recovery groups. So that's probably, the Cole's notes of the literature on recovery, and you can find information on me, on CSIR, the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research, and look me up and give me an email anytime you want if you have any other questions. Thank you.
And I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about a project that's going on here in Victoria. If you look in your packages, you'll find a little postcard here, and these are hot off the press. On the back of here is the initial results of a concept mapping project that Karin here has been leading for the last year in collaboration with Umbrella, with Solid Outreach, with Royal Roads and Island Health and the Victoria Division of Family Practice. And as it says on the card, we met with 75 people in Victoria who self-identified as having experience with substance use and asked them to complete the statement, "I would feel safe going to the doctor if," and then on the back, from the 700 odd statements we got in those focus groups that were facilitated by people with lived experience of substance use, we kind of narrowed that down to these 8 statements. The next stage of the project is going to be working with family physicians to translate some of this research into best practices to help you to better engage with your patients in primary care who have substance use problems. So you can find out more by visiting the website on here. This is, like I say, hot off the press. Bill is also involved with this project, as is Bryn Meadows, whose name came up in an earlier presentation. She's one of my graduate students, and she's going to be leading this next phase from Royal Roads University. So I know we're running over time. I'm going to stop there, but we'd be really interested to hear from you if you're interested in helping in some way with this project. Thanks.